This Labor Day service has become a tradition in our congregation, and with Director Pat Wynn, who's been conducting this choir for almost 30 years, leading Rock and Solidarity, along with her partner Bernie's accompaniment on guitar, I am glad to hear that this may not be the last time we will have you up here. A little bit of misinformation there. But still, I have deep gratitude for the many years you have already celebrated Labor Day with us. So let's give Pat, Bernie, and the choir another round of applause. The most classic song of the U.S. labor movement is the great union anthem, Solidarity Forever. The title of this service and sermon, Gaining Our Freedom, is inspired by one of its lines. We can break their haughty power, gain our freedom when we learn that the union makes us strong. Now, Solidarity Forever is often sung at the end of union conventions, something I've always loved. But maybe that's part of the reason we are at such an historical crossroads as we are now, facing a choice between business as usual, with its ongoing support of genocide in Gaza and now the West Bank, which is increasing the threat of regional war that could become a nuclear holocaust, its attacks on migrants, its failure to sufficiently mitigate climate disaster, and its continuing denial of many basic human rights, both domestically and internationally, versus the threat of outright fascism, as outlined in Project 2025, which offers the same results, only in a way more quickly, thoroughly, and decisively, at least for those of us who, by the luck of being born into certain bodies in certain places, have had the privilege to live most of our lives not that worried about bombs, starvation, or those dreaded knocks on the door. Most of us in this room, not all of us, but most, have had the freedom to avoid what many others are already living out, our worst nightmares about what fascism could look like for us or our families. Whenever anything becomes routine, a mere tradition, we risk forgetting its true meaning. We forget why it began and why we are doing it now. Solidarity Forever has become something like the Pledge of Allegiance or the Star-Spangled Banner, despite its profoundly antithetical message to those. Because it's things most of us say or sing, whether or not we really believe the words, just because we are supposed to, and it's listed on the agenda. Indeed, Solidarity's author, Ralph Chaplin, who wrote the song in 1915, feared that would become the case, and later in life he spoke out against unions using it if they were not fully committed to implementing its lyrics. Perhaps even voting has become a similar hollow tradition. Organized labor, for all its actual value, and believe me, I am a strong supporter of it, and its even greater potential, has actually done very little to prevent our arrival at today's crossroads, and neither has organized religion or any other major institution in our country. We need to ask why. Because now we have reached the point where perhaps I should have chosen the line, Is there anything left to us but to organize and fight? Is there anything left to us? We've tried looking the other way. We've tried living on vague messages of hope. We've tried patiently waiting for a savior. We've reluctantly allowed ourselves to be guilt-tripped into sacrificing our ideals and principles in the name of pragmatism and realpolitik. We've tried loyalty to our masters only to be betrayed time and time again. If our relationship to our economic and political system were like a personal relationship, we'd be like certain victims of domestic violence who become resigned that there is nothing they can do other than try to appease their abuser. Thankfully, though, it's part of human nature that when our literal existence or that of our loved ones is immediately threatened, we tend to organize and fight back. We break free of resignation. Yet, sadly, it's at that point when the risk to ourselves is greatest. So we tend not to do it until we have to. And by then, it may be too little or too late. Now, don't get me wrong. I think most people are pretty caring, regardless of their religious or political views. Most do strive to care for those around them. They serve others directly, both as workers and as volunteers, as neighbors, as churchgoers, as friends and relatives. And when we progressive people of faith want change, we serve too, and we also demonstrate, write letters, sign petitions, vote, campaign, all because we believe that things can get better, and because service, calling, and engagement give life meaning. Here in this church, we educate others on the issues, so we won't be ignorant or in denial, or deluded into working hard in ways that might make things worse. And if such responses to injustice are so ineffective as to be morally wrong, then I'm just as immoral as the next person, because I gladly do them too. And besides, we win sometimes. I just participated in 2 long-term campaigns that resulted in passing some of the strongest tenant protections in the country in the East Bay cities of Antioch and Concord. And that's a good thing. That's a victory worth celebrating. And I don't think most people, regardless of their views, have evil intent. I don't think most leaders of organized labor or organized religion are not good people. Even as a committed socialist, I don't think that all our politicians and business leaders are bad people. Instead, I think we are all caught up to an extent in a mass delusion of resignation, grounded in a culture of individualism that leads us to look only at what each of us can do on our own, or at best in small groups. The powers that be are so entrenched that we lack the imagination to believe they can be removed. So we settle for Band-Aids in the midst of genocide. Now, from the standpoint of an individual, it makes perfectly good sense to try to avoid the worst of a set of terrible choices. As Solidarity Forever says, what force on earth is weaker than the feeble strength of one? It's relatively easy to resign ourselves to this approach, perhaps relieving our troubled consciences. But deep down, don't we long for more? For example, don't we wish we could vote successfully for an end to genocide? An end to immigrants being locked in detention centers and having to go on hunger strikes to get our attention? An end to homelessness and to people dying from inadequate and unaffordable health care? For dismantling nuclear weapons and slashing the military budget? For reproductive freedom that doesn't get taken away? For reparations and lasting protections for all who have been marginalized and mistreated in this country? For effective and immediate mitigation to global warming? Occasionally, such issues may be partially on the ballot, or there may be a potentially viable candidate who agrees with us, but we still keep losing. If we want to win, and even in the long haul to survive, there has to be a different approach. Whatever we do this fall, in an understandable effort to keep things from getting worse, it may very well be the most we can do under current conditions. But we are still only buying time. Winning our real agenda will require a major spiritual as well as practical shift. It will require us organizing massively in our own names, as labor, as people of faith, as community activists, united in a mass movement internally respectful of our differences, speaking in voices independent from those we dutifully follow today in the media, academia, and the halls of governance. It will require rediscovering our imaginations, regaining our courage and convictions like Dennis's father did. And he paid a price, by the way, for what he did professionally. Recognizing the reckoning is upon us, and now is the time to organize. It will not be easy, safe, or comfortable. But as Friedrich Engels once said, freedom is the recognition of necessity. Only when we acknowledge what is necessary to win will we be free to act accordingly. We have to build a viable alternative to what currently is. We can't risk facing this crossroad again. For as UUs, it will require truly believing our own rhetoric, internalizing our UU principles like our lives depend on them, because they actually do, rather than, say, printing them on church bulletins or arguing over their wording in conventions. Our version of unions singing solidarity forever because the agenda says so. Now, to wrap this up, I want to read a famous short poem written in 1919, just 4 years after Ralph Chaplin wrote Solidarity Forever. Yes, it's by an old dead white guy, as was Chaplin, and you may remember it from some high school or college English class. It's a poem of deep despair, a dire warning written during a time of reckoning, a time like now. But don't be too worried, I have kind of an antidote for its message. It's the poem The Second Coming by the Irish poet William Butler Yeats. So I'm going to read it and make a small comment. Turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart. The center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. the blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. Surely some revelation is at hand. Surely the second coming is at hand. The second coming? Hardly are those words out when a vast image out of Spiritus Mundi troubles my sight. Somewhere in sands of the desert, a shape with lion body and the head of a man. A gaze blank and pitiless as the sun is moving its slow thighs, while all about it reel shadows of the indignant desert birds. The darkness drops again, but now I know that 20 centuries of stony sleep were vexed to nightmare by a rocking cradle. And what rough beast, its hour come round at last, slouches toward Bethlehem to be born? Well, I'm a bit afraid that beast is no longer slouching, but kind of galloping. Yet, we do not need to give in to despair, which is the ultimate version of resignation. We can instead adopt a positive vision of what is coming, of people who are no longer slouching, people who are galloping forward faster than any beast, people who have regained their convictions, like Dennis's father, awakened from the nightmare of business as usual, inspired but not vexed by the rocking cradle. People who can sing the words of Ralph Chaplin and truly mean them. In our hands is placed a power greater than their hoarded gold, greater than the might of armies, magnified 1,000-fold. We can bring to birth a new world from the ashes of the old. For the union makes us strong. Are you in?